everyone. This is Caitlin Coleman. I'm with Synerzip. I'd like to introduce our moderator today, Pankaj Jain. He's our VP of Software Services at Synerzip. Pankaj, over to you.
Thanks, Caitlin, and welcome everyone to our webinar today. One thing I do want to encourage all of our participants to enter your questions through our chat box, and I will ask Ron, our speaker today, at the appropriate time. But before I introduce our speaker, let me take a minute to introduce myself and Synerzip. So I started my career as a developer, grew to playing VP engineering and CTO roles. I co-founded an e-commerce company and ran it successfully for 5 years. I joined Synerzip 5 years ago and loving every moment of it. Synerzip serves as an agile software development partner to VC of PC-backed companies. We've been around for over 15 years and have served over 150 clients. With that covered, let me introduce our speaker for today. It is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Ron Lichty. I have known Ron for a few years now. He's an active member or a sponsor of the local Silicon Valley engineering leadership meetups, which I attend regularly, among many. Ron has a great feel for how to make software development hum. I'm looking forward to hear some of his insights today. With that said, over to you, Ron.
Okay, so I'm Ron Lichty. I've spent 30 years thinking about and focusing on making software development hum. I started in tech as a programmer and then became a manager and a director and a VP of engineering. 21 years ago, I encountered Agile for the first time, and when I was at Charles Schwab, actually, and 11 years ago, I began training friends teams in Agile. 8 years ago, I pivoted my career to consulting, to coaching engineering and business and product leaders on how to build and improve their teams, sometimes stepping in as an interim VP of engineering, interweaving from time to time trainings for teams and executives and making their process more effectively agile. 16 years ago, my co-author and I began crafting one of the very few books on managing software people and teams and the history of software development to share what we learned about managing software people and teams. Last year, after 4 printings and it being translated into 4 languages, our publisher, Addison Wesley, engaged us to craft a second edition. It's updated throughout, and it has an entirely new chapter specifically addressing our roles as managers in Agile. I'm also the co-author of the periodic study of product team performance. And I'm going to share some of the results of these with you as we go along. In each of the studies, we've asked product team members on product teams all over the world, developers and testers and product managers and project managers and program managers and scrum masters, everybody on product teams, to tell us first if they considered their teams to be high performance or low performance or something in between. And then we asked about various of their practices, and we looked to see if there were correlations between practices and high performance teams, and we found some. In addition, I'll be sharing some rules of thumb and nuggets of wisdom from the center section of our book. My co-author and I, when we began writing our book, in part because we've been sharing rules of thumb and nuggets of wisdom with each other over weekend breakfasts for a decade already, and thought we should collect those, and we collected 300 of them into the center 80 pages of our book, the center section, and some really wise advice from a lot of engineering leaders around the world. And so I'll be sharing a few of those with you as we go along as well. So one more thing I want to say about consulting. So I have, in my career, both as a full-time employee and now as a consultant, I've typically been hired to transform chaos to clarity. And what I've found is that the problems generally are not people. The problems generally fall into these 5 categories. They're always unique. They're always unique to the individual team's issues, but they tend to fall into categories of process and culture and communication and planning and rigor. So what I want to share with you today are 5 practices that we all know are important. I'm going to contend they qualify as critical. Yet the nuances too frequently escape too many of us. And so I want to share nuances that I've found that result in being agile, not just doing agile, in definitions of done that generate predictable quality, in stand-ups that are more than just status meetings, in planning meetings that result in plans that teams are willing to stand behind, and estimating that delivers predictability, reasonable predictability. So those are my 5 topics for the next 50 minutes. So we're going to start with, don't just do Agile, that first one. And my that first rule of thumb, and it's become a mantra for me over the last few years, software development is a team sport. And so I want to talk about teams. And in talking about teams, I want to take a few seconds. I'm going to give you a few seconds. Grab a piece of paper, grab a scrap of paper, and I want you to think about the best team you've been on and the highest performance team you've been on, and think about what were the characteristics, what were the relationships, what were the qualities, what were the ways of being that made that team stand out. So I'm going to give you a few seconds just to think about that and to write down a few notes on a scrap of paper, because that's what we're going to talk about over the coming 50 minutes. And I'd like you to be able to glance down and remember that's what we're talking about, is that best team you've ever been on. That's what we want to recreate. So what were the characteristics, relationships, qualities, ways of being that made that team stand out? Okay, so some of you may still be writing, but what I typically find, and so this is hard to do on a webinar, but when I'm doing this kind of a talk in person, I've asked a lot of people on a lot of teams to do that exact exercise. And my guess is many of you, when you look down at that piece of paper, you're going to see words like trust and mutual respect and shared goals, phrases like my teammates had my back and psychological safety. And in fact, best teams really, I mean, think about it. That's what made those teams really great. So we're going to come back to this. But I want to tangent for a minute, because I said we're going to talk about doing Agile versus being Agile. And doing Agile, it's Agile practices that we do for doing Agile. So as I began thinking about this, I thought, well, am I way off on the wrong track? Are practices actually valuable? And so it occurred to me, why don't I just list a few? And so I listed it looks like eight or nine practices. There's way more than this, but I thought, well, this is a good sampling of practices. These actually have value. I began looking down each of these and realized that compared to what we did before, so I date from the waterfall days, and compared to what we did in the waterfall days, every one of these practices has value. And so I was heartened by that, actually. But then I began thinking about, so let me think about a metaphor for this. So I'm going to do a bunch of tangents actually, but I'm going to tangent for the moment to talk about voting machines and voting and democracy. Voting machines are tools. Voting machines deliver value. Voting is a practice, but does voting make us a democracy? Do voting machines make us democracy? In fact, we all know that there are countries that have voting machines that are not democracies. And so voting machines are tools, and voting is a practice that supports democracy. But in fact, democracy emanates from values and principles. And similarly, Agile practices don't make us Agile. I walk into organizations all the time and say, oh, we're Agile, we do stand-ups, or we're Agile, we do retrospectives, or we're Agile, we do this or that. And Agile practices don't actually make us Agile. Agile, in fact, like democracy, emanates from values and principles. Agile practices only deliver better teams. They don't deliver great teams. And great teams come from Agile values. Agile values inspire great teams, and I'm going to give you a few of the words out of the Agile Manifesto, because I think the Agile Manifesto is a great lens that we can use to look at our Agile practices and ask the question, are we actually being Agile, or are we just doing Agile? So here are a few of those words. Build projects around motivated individuals. Trust to get the job done. Face-to-face conversation. Self-organizing teams. the team reflects and tunes and adjusts. Those are Agile values that we can ask the question, are we actually being Agile or are we just doing Agile? Now I want to talk about one of these, that's self-organizing teams one, because I think self-organizing teams is a hard concept to get our heads around, and it certainly was a hard one for me to get my head around. And I found that even with these words that, and so I'll give you some more words, because I think for a team to self-organize, everyone has to participate. Every team member has to step up for a team to be truly self-organizing. And it's because every single member of every team that I've ever seen has unique expertise, and everyone leads from their expertise when it's most needed. Even the intern leads from their expertise. Even we want our intern to lead when their expertise is most needed. And if they can't, that probably means we hired the wrong intern. But again, we're wrapping our heads around a bunch of words, and I think it's really helpful to think in terms of metaphors. So let me switch, let me tangent again. Let me switch and ask the question, if our self-organizing team were an acting troupe, what kind of acting would we be doing? Now, I can hear some of you from your many geographical locations are calling out improv, and in fact, that's exactly right, because everyone on an improv troupe is leading. There's no two leaders at one time. There's only one leader at a time, but they're always listening to each other to know when to add to what it is, the magic that the improv troupe is creating. So let me ask another question. If our self-organizing team were a music group, what kind of music do we perform? Our self-organizing team would probably be performing jazz, or maybe we'd be the Grateful Dead. But we'd be doing jazz or improv, and what are the characteristics of improv and jazz? Who's the leader? Every single member of an improv troupe, every single member of a jazz group is the leader. Every single member of a jazz group will solo at some point. Not that they're playing only by themselves. The whole group is playing with them, but they're leading. The drummer may be leading, the sax player may be leading, the guitarist or the bass player may be leading, but every member of a jazz group likely solos, leads at one point, and everyone follows and they listen to each other to know when to transition that leadership from one to the other. So we've been talking about Agile values, and we've been talking about best team characteristics, and I think they are indelibly linked. Agile values are where best teams come from. So 11 years ago, when I taught my first friends team, actually, Agile concepts and about doing Agile and about being Agile, I got asked this question. I got asked, are there projects not suitable for Agile? And I scratched my head, and I was still scratching my head a couple of years later. I could not come up with an answer to a project, a software development project that was not suitable for Agile, that would not be made better by Agile. And then it occurred to me that if I just worded this question slightly differently, I would have an answer. And the slightly differently was to ask, are there cultures not suitable for Agile? And in fact, this was a question, this is rephrased this way. In fact, I had an answer because I had been fired from an organization a few years before that was not suitable for Agile. I had been fired from an organization that was micromanaged. Micromanagement is a culture that is not suitable for Agile because micromanagement disrupts Agile. It prevents best teams from forming. It prevents learning. Micromanaged teams become order takers, not leaders and participants in making great software that delights customers. Agile calls for everyone to step up. Micromanagement causes everyone to step back. It causes engineers to put their hands in their pockets and say, okay, so I did what you told me. What else? What do you want me to do next? It's always about taking orders, not about stepping up and being part of delighting customers. Now, I'm going to tangent again. I want to talk about shared leadership. So we've been talking about shared leadership, and the essence of self-organizing teams is shared leadership. And so what's the role of managers? So traditionally, managers, we run things, we give direction, we tell people what to do. They like being the center of attention. Here I am giving a webinar. And in fact, Agile has terminology for us. But the problem for us is that it doesn't share that with us much. So here's a typical drawing that's drawn during training, and we see a Scrum Master and a product owner and the Scrum team and who all of them talk to, and who's missing? People managers. There's no manager in this picture. And so we don't train managers what their role is, but the role is servant leadership. We are called on as managers to be servant leaders. Here's a rule of thumb from Marison Campos that I particularly like, that he was talking about Scrum Masters, but I think it applies to managers as well. If you're the Scrum Master, or in my case, the manager, and everyone's looking at you, you're doing it wrong. The team should be looking to each other. That's what self-organizing teams, that's what Agile culture is about. So what are the roles of managers in Agile? So there are 3 roles I've listed here that are nuanced differences from things that managers have always been called on to do, but often don't do. So fostering an Agile culture, fostering a software development culture, a culture that supports software development, that enables software development, is a fundamental role that managers should be taking on, but Agile calls on us to foster Agile culture. We need to model and defend and evangelize the values that are consistent with a software development culture, and in this case, Agile values. And we need to empower self-organization and empower excellence. Now, there are a 4th and 5th and 6th and 7th. There are many more roles actually, but I'm going to list the 4th one because we typically, if I were to ask 100 people who are doing Agile who removes impediments, they'd all say Scrum Masters. But if I asked who do Scrum Masters escalate issues to that they can't solve themselves, they would always answer managers. And in fact, managers have a fundamental role in removing impediments. And managers have roles in things that they've typically done, which are counseling, which they should be, at least counseling and coaching and mentoring the folks on their teams. They should be scaling their organizations as they grow, scaling Scrum if it's Scrum, and they're responsible for hiring and firing, for recruiting talent, and for handling the problems that teams experience and escalate to their managers. But I want to talk about these 3 a little bit more, dig a little bit more deeply, and particularly fostering that Agile culture. So in fostering an Agile culture, there were a bunch of seminal leaders in management thinking in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. Now, probably most of you have heard of Maslow. So Abraham Maslow created the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Most of us learned about it in junior high or high school or college, and we address it for half a page or a page in our book to talk about how does that apply to software development, and it does, and it's really helpful to have thought about how it does in certain situations. But another one of those thought leaders in management was a guy named Douglas McGregor, and Douglas McGregor in the 1950s came up with this theory X, theory Y of management. So on the left, he said, and he termed it theory X. On the left, theory X management is how from the industrial age, maybe before the Industrial Revolution even, what managers did. They were authoritarian, they had repressive style, they told people what to do, they pushed down on the organization. What McGregor said is that going forward, we're in a period of thought stuff. We're in a period of thinking people on our teams, not of just doing people on our teams. And our role as managers is theory Y management, is supporting groups in doing what they do, in supporting our staff. And what's interesting is that the words that McGregor used, words like enabling and empowering and developmental and continuous improvement for theory Y, are the very words that Agile uses to describe servant leadership. When we're empowering self-organization and excellence, here's a rule of thumb that I picked up at Agile Open in 2012. Management sets the boundaries of what needs to be done and says to the team, I trust you to figure out how to get it done. And here's Esther Derby, the co-founder of the Scrum Alliance, who said, when teams self-organize, a manager's job is to engineer the organization so that teams can do their best work. And we spent an entire chapter actually on establishing successful programming cultures, which done right are in fact Agile cultures. Creating an Agile culture is about establishing a successful programming culture. So I want to say one more thing about programming cultures because software development is a team sport. Team sports are gated on communication and collaboration. Communication is core. And creating a culture of communication, we need to do, we leaders, but also we on teams need to create a culture of communication at every level, within the organizations, upward. We need to create a culture of communication. And I want to define communication. I think Kimberly Weefling, a friend of mine, said we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. We should use them in this ratio. When we were putting together our book, I thought, I wonder if Kimberly actually said that the first time. I Googled it and found out that some Greek guy about 5,000 years ago said something very similar to this the first time, and it is so true. And if that's the definition of communication, I think that in software development, we cannot over-communicate. I think maybe sales can over-communicate. I think maybe marketing can over-communicate, but I don't think in software development we can over-communicate. And now I want to take this one more place, which is to say something about Google's Project Aristotle, because so Google, just like the rest of us, has high performance teams and low performance teams and teams in between. Google, unlike the rest of us, has a ton of money and they study everything. They use their money to study everything, and they set up a team called the Project Aristotle team to study why it is that some of their teams are high performance and some of them are low performance. Now, you may not have heard of Google's Project Aristotle, but I guarantee you've heard of the outcome of Project Aristotle. The thing that all of their high performance teams had was psychological safety. And interestingly, they say you can actually observe psychological safety. They said, if a team has psychological safety, what you will observe is equality in distribution of conversational turn taking. Love this phrase, which means every single member of the team, including the intern, talks about the same amount of time when they're having conversations and discussions and working through stuff. No one dominates, no one is silent. That's a self-organizing team. It's the opportunity, everyone feels the opportunity and the safety to speak up, and they've got that mutual respect. So let's go back to those characteristics of that best team you were ever on, that mutual respect that encourages leadership from everyone. So I want to say one more thing, which is about virtual teams, because we're all virtual these days. We're all remote from each other, and noting that given there's no substitute for face-to-face meetings, that means there's never enough communication. And when there's never enough communication, what that means is that we as leaders, and all of us on our teams are leaders, need to be leaders, we all have to commit to communicate. So Ted Young, who at the time was a development manager at Guidewire, said that the more distance between teammates, the more you have to formalize communication and make it explicit. The more intentional we have to be about communication.
So Ron, I had a question on this one. So face-to-face meetings. So I find like since because of the COVID, at least our clients and everything, we are having more video meetings. So like this webinar we are doing right now, it used to be over the phone, but because of the environment we are in, it just video is just turned on by default. So what's your take? What do you hear from the clients? Are people having more face-to-face so-called meetings, like because of the video things?
Yeah, so the challenge is, so people are having more face-to-face meetings, and they're having more video meetings for lack of face-to-face meetings and the lack of casual contact with our colleagues. So when we're co-located, we can grab a colleague as they're going off to get coffee. We see them when they're not buried in the zone, and we know that they're available to us. And what we find with when we're entirely remote is we've got to schedule meetings, we've got to schedule those contacts, but we have to be proactive about making sure that we have the kind of communication that we had when we could just grab somebody who was going to coffee or grab somebody who was walking through the hallway.
That's good.
It's a harder environment, and there are some advantages to this environment we're in, which is there are fewer casual interruptions to
Yes.
our being in the zone, but we have to be really explicit and really intentional about making sure that the communication we need to have happens.
We have to
So
schedule our coffee breaks. We have to schedule our coffee breaks, basically, right?
we do, and there are teams that do that.
Yeah.
We're going to move on to talking about the second one of these, which is definitions of done. And note that I ran into definitions of done the very first time I encountered Agile, and I thought that's a kind of cool practice. The teams get together, and so the concept of definition of done is not management hands you a definition of done, but the team gets together to talk about what does it mean to be done? What does it mean for us? What does it mean for our software? What does it mean for our customers? What does it mean for our culture? What does it mean to be done? And the team scribes a definition of done for itself. But it occurred to me a few years ago that maybe the definition of done may be one of the most powerful practices in Agile. And I thought, well, let's test this. Let's actually we've got this. I'm part of this co-authoring the study of product team performance. Let's ask that question. And so the question we asked was, the question we were trying to find out was, does having a definition of done matter? And what we actually asked, we thought we were pretty crafty in doing this, was who creates your definition of done? Because if people said, well, no one does, then we'd find out that that they didn't have a definition of done. So we're going to do a poll here. Jill, Caitlin, can you bring up the poll?
Sarah,
Yeah.
who created your definition of done? So we're just waiting on everybody to vote. Excellent. About 80% of our people have voted, and here are the results.
About 2/3 of teams have created their own definitions of done, which I commend all of those who've done. So here's what we found. Here's what we found back in 2016. We found that 7.4% said no one, we wing it. And what we found when we correlated the results that you see on the screen with high performance teams was that having a definition of done matters. What we found was the 7.4% of product teams that don't have a definition of done, in fact, performed the worst. We found that the 48% of product teams, just having a definition of done did not make you a high performance team. Those product teams that had definitions of done handed down by managers outside the team were just average performers. It was at that time, 45%. I'm delighted to see 67% of this audience. The 45% of product teams that rely on the product teams, the product owner on the team or the team collaboratively to create their definition of done. So someone inside the team, and ideally the whole team together inside their team, creating their definition of done correlated with the highest performance teams.
And just
so
bottom line,
bottom line, definitions of done matter and created within the team matter most. Pankaj?
Yeah, I wanted to just, sorry, don't interrupt. So, Synergip, as you know, like we work with many clients in the agile process, and this is very interesting. Like what I saw the polls, pretty much our clients, I see the same thing on our client side also, where the team is defining the definition of doneness. That's really makes the high power team and the result. One of the questions that came up on this topic was on the definition of done. I think I think Pat is asking a question. Definition of done you talked about was the done better by the team. What's your thought about the acceptance criteria? Who defines the acceptance criteria? Is the acceptance criteria defined first and then you figure out the definition of done or whatever?
Yeah, we should separate out definitions of done and acceptance criteria. So
Yeah.
definitions of done are engineering criteria for how we know that every single story in our backlog is done. And we want it to be very similar to what it is that's the criteria for the project, the whole project to be done. Because if every story meets the same criteria that we set for the whole project, then we can release at any moment. Our product owners can say, hey, we've got enough of a product here that would delight customers. Let's release this as a version, and we can just keep going and release subsequent stuff as the next version. So definitions of done apply to every story. Acceptance criteria are story by story, and acceptance criteria are typically customer criteria. This is what it means from a customer standpoint, from a customer viewpoint, from a customer UI, from a user acceptance testing standpoint for the story to be done. So each story has its own acceptance criteria that are customer criteria. At the same time, the team develops a definition of done that applies to every story across all of our backlog.
Thanks.
Let's move on from definitions of done to stand-ups. So similarly, we asked in our 2015 study, how effective and how frequent are stand-ups in your organization? So I think we've got a poll to ask, how frequently does your team hold stand-ups?
And here are your results.
Wow.
Wow, 92% are holding them daily. That's really powerful. 4% are not holding stand-ups. 8% are holding them once a week. So that's really interesting.
I'm really excited about this poll, and the number seems like in our audience today, a lot of our clients are, it seems like here, because one of our fundamental principle as a part of the distributed teams, right? We work with clients and the daily scrum meeting, daily meeting stand-ups are the key. Some clients, small clients, because they are very busy, CEOs and CTO, they say, no, but we kind of insist, it's kind of our principle. If you don't have the 10 minutes, you're not going to get anything done. Does not matter what you're trying to do. So we really enforce it. And I was very encouraged to see our poll today, like 92% of the people do say it's even those 10 minutes stand-ups matter. Right? So
great. In fact, here's a look from 2015, which was not nearly that level. So it's great that our audience is showing that level. So how effective are stand-ups in your organization? So what we found when we correlated was that product teams that do not hold stand-ups, and that was, or do not hold effective stand-ups, perform worst. And that was 18% at the time. Product teams with stand-ups that are effective and regular perform better than the average. Product teams that have stand-ups that are effective and daily perform best. So bottom line, stand-ups matter, and stand-ups held daily and effectively matter most.
So Rod, quick question. Paige is asking when she had a comment, and she's saying like we don't hold stand-up because we work collaboratively and don't need them. We are talking all the time and what's going on with each member of the team, so we don't need a stand-up. So what do you think?
So that's possible. That's possible. If you truly don't need stand-up. So let's talk about what an effective stand-up is, and then I'll let
okay, sounds good.
I forget. Decide whether what they're doing as a substitute is working, because it might be. So what makes for effective stand-ups? So the three questions. So when I've asked hundreds of developers. I train teams in Agile. I ask this in every training. What are the three questions And what I always hear, 99% of the time, what I hear is, what did I do yesterday? What am I going to do tomorrow? And what's standing in my way? And the first two questions stated as what I did and what am I going to do, I believe are broken. Because what I want to hear is, what did I accomplish yesterday? And what am I going to accomplish tomorrow? This one nuance could make your stand-up more effective all by itself. Because I walk into stand-ups all the time in which I hear some engineer saying, well, I was working on the blah, blah subsystem yesterday. I'm going to continue working on the blah, blah subsystem tomorrow. And oh, by the way, that's probably what I'll say tomorrow and the next day and the next day after that too. And I'm giving no clue to the rest of my team how I'm doing. There's no information there about whether I'm on target, whether I'm on plan, whether I'm accomplishing, there's that word, whether I'm accomplishing what it is I need to accomplish in order for us to make our sprint plan. And fundamentally, the daily stand-up is about not those three questions. It's about how are we doing on our sprint plan. So in addition to that, the three questions are not enough because they really don't get to how we're doing on our sprint plan because they're very me focused. They tend to make stand-up status meetings, and as status meetings, I see them devolving into stand-ups via Slack, which I think is terrible. If software development is a team sport, maybe we ought to talk to each other at least once a day. So your question, Pankaj, there's somebody who says we're talking to each other all the time. Great. So otherwise, we can be just a group of people who report to the same stand-up. So the focus is, how are we doing on our sprint plan? And what I've introduced to teams is using a technique called Fist to 5, which is typically called an Agile technique. I don't know that it's specifically Agile, but we use it in Agile to bring the focus from me to us. And the question is, what's our confidence in our sprint plan? And here's what a Fist to 5 looks like. No confidence, we won't make our sprint plan. Totally confident we're still on track to make our sprint plan. I'm pretty confident we can make our sprint plan. We're everybody on the team gathered together for our daily stand-up is doing a Fist to 5, is on a signal, all holding up some number of fingers to indicate, are we on track to make our plan? And what I'm looking for is 4s and 5s, or the conversation to get to 4s and 5s. And the question is, how will we work together as a self-organizing team to accomplish the sprint goal if somebody says, no, I don't think we're on track. I think Ron, for example, is way behind. He thought it was going to take him 2 days to work on this subtask, and suddenly it looks like it's more like 5 or 6 or 7 days that it's going to take him. That means he's not going to get to other parts of what he took on for the sprint. How do we adjust for each other? How do we have each other's backs? Fundamentally, I'm going to go back to one of those bullet points I had on that best team, which was having each other's backs. How do we have each other's backs in order to make our sprint plan? Now, it's also possible that as we're standing there talking about in our daily stand-up about our work, that everybody is underwater, in which case it's a heads up early to our product owner that we're not going to finish something in the sprint, and maybe we ought to decide which thing not to finish, not to just randomly not finish something at the end of the sprint. It's an opportunity for a product owner to make the intelligent, informed choice about which thing we ought to pull out so that we can deliver the most delight to our customers out of this sprint, so that we can show the most progress to our customers and our stakeholders and our executives. So introducing this simple Fist to 5 practice from a fist to a 5 can help a group of individuals become a team.
So Ron, you have not patented this Fist to 5 concept, right? Can I use it in my teams?
Yeah, no, it's not that. No, please do.
Okay, it's a great concept.
Share it as widely as I can. I learned, and I didn't invent it. I learned it from other smarter people than me, and I'm delighted to share it with you and with all of you. So let's talk about planning. Sprint planning meetings. First, And so I see this less, but first, backlog reordering has to be complete when the team comes into the room, when the team begins its sprint planning meeting. The backlog needs to be in place. It's one of the amazing inventions of Agile was this backlog concept where the backlog is organized such that a developer can walk up to the backlog and grab the top story and pull it into this from the backlog into the sprint plan and know that it's going to deliver the most value to our customers. It's going to deliver the most delight to our customers. It is the most important thing that we can work on. And that backlog needs to be ordered in that way when we walk in to do our sprint planning meeting. The team, so as rules of thumb around this, the team pulls cards from the backlog into the plan. Now, if the team doesn't pull the top story in the backlog, and I've seen that happen, that's a different problem, and that's a problem we need to address because there's very, very seldom a reason that we wouldn't pull the top card into the sprint plan. So the team pulls cards from the backlog into the plan, and they're not assigned by the Scrum Master. They're not assigned by the product owner. The product owner has clued the team into what's going to deliver the most value just by ordering the backlog. The team's now trying to figure out how it can create the most productivity, the most outcomes that it can create out of what's in the backlog. And so it may skip some things because the things at the very top are all database, and it would swamp our database person. And it wouldn't make sense to do all of those things in the same sprint. So we're the team's looking for how do we create the most productive sprint we can create. The product owner is looking for what's the most value we can deliver to our customers, maybe, and what value do we have to deliver to our customers in this sprint in order to show progress. And so we're balancing those two things, outcomes and productivity, as we do this. But we can lose sight of our being a team as we break stories into tasks and identify who's going to tackle tasks and how much time it's going to take each of us to do that. And so given that the goal is a perfect sprint plan for a team, optimum team effectiveness and optimum value delivery, we can close our planning meeting with a similar fist to 5 confidence vote, Pankaj. In this case, the question for the fist to 5 is this our best sprint plan? No confidence to totally confident, and our product owners voting along with all of our team members on is this our best sprint plan, and we're looking again. I'm looking for 4s and 5s. And if I've got a 3 or a 2 or a 1 or even a fist, that the question becomes: so what would make it? What would we change in our plan to make it the best sprint plan, the perfect sprint plan for our team? So fist to 5 again brings a group of individuals together as a team to talk about how do we create the most value for our customers. So let's move on to estimating. I don't think I've ever stepped into a company as either an employee or a consultant that didn't want to know when's it going to be done. Have you ever had a company not ask when's it going to be done, Prakash?
No, they always tell me it better be done yesterday. They all wanted it yesterday.
Yeah. And of course it can't be done yesterday. We all know that. It probably can't be done tomorrow either. But estimating, in fact, what I see too often is that pointing is done just on a sprint by sprint basis. And it's not done for the whole backlog. So I'm going to share with you that pointing should be done for the entire backlog, and we can do it. And we can do it in a very small amount of time. That pointing an entire backlog, in fact, should take a half day or less. And pointing is about relative sizing, not absolute sizing. It's about, is this story bigger than that one or smaller than that one? It is not about how many days it's going to take. It looks like this. Here's a team co-located that printed from Jira, printed all of their stories. They had 150 stories and epics. in their backlog, and they printed them out from 0 onto 4x6 cards, and we put them, and it took them 2 hours to put them in order. And so the upper left-hand corner, the upper left-hand end of this is sometimes called snaking. The upper left-hand end is the story that will take the least amount of time, take maybe even a few hours. Down there on the lower right-hand end, as that thing snakes around, the lower right-hand end is the epic that will take the team the longest amount of time to accomplish. And they're in order. It took them 2 hours to put them in this order. They started with a stack of 4x6 cards and put them in order. And then it took them 1 more hour, so no numbers whatsoever in that first 2 hours. Now they've got them in order by what's going to take the most amount of time to the least amount of time, their entire backlog. And they, by the way, there's only 120 on the table because they discovered 30 of them were duplicates or already done. So they got the cruft out of their system. And they've now got 120 on the table, and they start at the upper left-hand end and start writing 1s on those cards until it's obvious that the next one is a 2. And they write 2s until it's obvious the next one's a 3, and 3s until it's a 5, until they find where the break to 8s and 13s and 20s and 40s and 100s are. 3 hours to snake a backlog of 150 cards. This can be done remotely as well. The snaking is by rows. So it starts at the upper left and goes across until you get to the end of that row and starts at the beginning of the next row and goes through and starts at the beginning of the next row. So the snaking is by rows, but it was done using a tool called Miro, which used to be called real-time board. This is actually the first team I worked on doing this. A team that was located in rural Maine. It turns out there are not a lot of .NET developers in rural Maine, so they were scattered all over the country. And we did this using real-time board, now called Miro, and snaked all of their stories. And with the size, what we really want to do, once the stories are then our product owner, we give these to our product owner. Now our product owner knows what the size is. The product owner wants to organize the backlog not by value. We always talk about organizing the backlog by value, but in fact, what we actually organize it by is ROI. Because, well, I'll give you my favorite story. My favorite story is teleportation. If I could teleport to where all of you are, I would delightedly do that. But unfortunately, while teleportation is my highest value story, and if my backlog were ordered by value, it would be at the top of the backlog. Every time I ask developers how long will it take to develop teleportation, they tell me it will take an infinite amount of time. My highest value divided by infinity results in an ROI that's uncalculably small and is at the bottom of the backlog, not the top of the backlog. So we organize backlogs really by ROI, or bang for the buck. And once stories are reordered by bang for the buck as a backlog, now leveraging relative sizing, that's relative sizing that we've got through our whole backlog, plus velocity. We're a stable team, which means how many points do we actually accomplish in a sprint, in 2 sprints, in 3 sprints, and I really look for averaging 3 sprints. Now we can take the average of 3 sprints velocity and walk down the remainder of our backlog and be able to identify on October 15th, this is where we're likely to be. And we'll be right within plus or minus 20% in my experience over and over and over again.
Very good.
Too-fast relative sizing is not something I invented. It was invented by Steve Bachman 18 years ago. He's written a book about it. It's 99 cents on Amazon. Called Practical Estimation, a pocket guide to making dependable project schedules. Steve also wrote a novel about software development that embeds his 99-cent book as one chapter of the novel. The novel is called Predictability. I highly recommend it. It's a beach read, and here we are in the summertime. And if you get to go to the beach, I recommend taking Predictability along with you. In the study of product team performance, we actually looked at backlogs and estimating in the study that we just released on May 1st. So let's first do one more poll. A poll asking, do individual contributors size all the stories or requirements in your backlog or just those that have been selected for the next iteration? So we've got actually several more choices than that. Looks like we've got our poll up and people are voting, Pankaj.
So while they are coming in, so one of the, Dan is asking one question around which I wanted to ask. So he's asking, how is this the estimating exercise prioritizing backlog different than the waterfall? You often can't tell what every single piece of a project will be when you are at that early into project. This seems like a waterfall.
So it has nothing to do with waterfall because we're not going to do all of those stories. We're just getting a sense on the team, and it's a really useful chartering exercise. So I'm going to suggest to you that given we're not doing waterfall, given what product managers always wanted to happen when they wrote hundreds of pages of requirements and never got, because none of us ever managed to read and grok all of hundreds of pages of requirements. What they really wanted was us to come away with a sense of what it is that they were trying to accomplish for our customers. And in fact, it's a really useful chartering exercise where our product managers walk into the room, they spend maybe an hour really wrapping our heads around the vision for the product. Now we get into all the stories they've got in mind. We size them. We can do all of that chartering exercise in half a day. There's probably other chartering things we want to do to fill out the day. And that chartering exercise is just incredibly valuable for delivering shared understanding across the whole team. As I said, we're not going to develop all those. We're just giving the eye of ROI, the buck of bang for the buck, to our product owners so that they're informed by that when they order their backlogs, and so they don't put teleportation at the top of the backlog. And now we're going to walk down the backlog and deliver based on what's going to deliver the most value to our customers, what's going to delight our customers most, which is every bit as agile as we believe it to be. What do we get from our poll? Only 13% size an entire backlog of stories up front. 39%, this is what I very commonly see, is are sizing just iteration by iteration. 43%, I'm really sorry you've only got an iteration or two of stories in your backlog. What that suggests to me is that your product managers are not giving you a roadmap of where you're going. And just because we're doing Agile does not mean that roadmaps are not valuable. The cost of writing just the feature names, just the stories onto cards is really low. It's basically the subheads in those hundreds of pages of requirements that's all we have to do to get started on a project is understand where might this thing go. It's not to say we're not going to have new stuff come in, because we all do, but it's a really useful thing to get started.
Yes. Around time check, you have like 5 minutes.
Yep, so, and I'm almost at the end. So do individual contributors size. So here's what we found. 17% that sizing the entire backlog correlates to improved performance. The 17% that sizes the entire backlog of stories or requirements upfront correlated with the highest performance teams. So you can take that to your own value. Only 17% in our poll did that. So takeaways. So how do we foster? So number one, don't just do Agile. How do we foster being Agile? By fostering shared leadership and an Agile culture, trusting our people, shielding teams from politics and distraction, removing impediments, empowering self-organization and excellence, creating a culture of communication, and modeling and defending and evangelizing Agile values. Secondly, stand-ups matter, and stand-ups held daily and effectively matter most. And Fist to 5 is a really useful technique. Definitions of done created within the team matter most. Fist to 5 technique can help teams be more effective teams, used in every sprint planning meeting and every stand-up. and effective pointing leads to effective estimating. Relatively size an entire 3 months plus backlog correlates with the highest performance teams. So you may want to take a screenshot of this for the code if you want a copy of my book, because you can get 35% off with that code at that URL.
How long this code is going to be valid? Because we're going to be sending a follow-up.
I think for a year.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's
I sent
a long
the follow-up email too.
Yeah, so the slides of the video of today's presentation and the recording of the video will be mailed to our audience. But yeah, I highly encourage everyone to just take advantage of this coupon. It's a promotion. It's a great. Okay.
Do we have questions?
Yeah, we have one question from, I think, yeah, so Shohab asked a question when relative sizing all the stories in the backlog. So you did all that exercise and now you have new stories added, whatever. So what is the frequency where you go through entire thing? Because the reordering needs to happen, right? So can you?
Yeah, so I work with a bunch of companies of all sizes, but the startups, all of you in startups know that your founders ideate at a rate of ideation that is an order of magnitude faster than we can develop.
Yeah.
And many of you find that your founders have the best idea, the thing that you ought to work on next, and so it pushes its way. My rule of thumb is that the top 2.5 sprints worth of stories need to be ready. So that concept of the definition of ready. And if the top 2.5 sprints worth of stories, if there's a new story that's pushing its way into that top 2.5 sprints worth of stories, then 2 days before our planning meeting, we're going to tack a 10-minute meeting onto the end of our stand-up so that it's not punctuated through the day, so we don't interrupt developers multiple times. And we'll do that additional 10 minutes. We'll just bring up our, we'll lay the cards out if we're co-located, or we'll just bring up the Miro board or the real-time board or the Miro board.
Okay.
And we'll fit the new cards in where they go.
Great. Thanks, Ron. I think the great presentation. Let me just quickly go over some slides about Synergy. So Synergy, basically, we've been around over 15 years. We have served over 150 clients, as you can see. So most of the time, our clients come to us to accelerate their roadmap, right? As we were talking about, everybody wants things to be done yesterday, right? So when you need to scale your engineering team. So that's basically what we do. Cost savings, because our development center is in Pune, India. So obviously with so there is a tremendous cost saving in terms of total, you talked about ROI piece. Another thing is like also we have over 500 plus software developers, right? Software professionals. That means we cover entire gamma of the technology, whether it's a big data, artificial intelligence, or whatever. Maybe you may have gaps, so we can fill those gaps easily as well. As you can see, this is just yeah. So there is a nice subset of the thing. As you can see, different domains. We are domain agnostic, technology agnostic. We work with healthcare, edtech. We do have clients like Google. I'm sure, Ron, you have heard about them. Dell, things like that. But our bread and butter target customer base is small to medium-sized growth companies, PE or VC-backed growth companies. But we work across all the domains. Most of our clients are referenceable. So it's one of the interesting things, Synergy, we take pride in. Like most of our clients are like referenceable. So you can go to our website and see their testimonials and see what they say about Synergy. And I think we are almost towards the end of the time. So I just wanted to, if you can go a couple of slides. So here is our contact points. But also more importantly, I do want to encourage everyone to register for our next Zip Chat session by our VP Engineering, Mike Watson, and special guest Bruce. They're going to talk about service mesh. So thanks, Ron, again for your great presentation. I really like fit to first concept. And have a good day, everyone, and see you in our next. Bye.